Native woman knocked at the door for work. What the lonely cowboy saw left him frozen in shock. The ranch stood alone at the edge of a wide valley where dry grass stretched toward distant hills. The land looked peaceful from far away, but living there required patience and strength. The cowboy had learned that long ago. He woke before sunrise every morning, fed the horses, checked the fences, and worked until the sky turned red again at evening. Days passed quietly, and sometimes he did not hear another human voice for weeks. He told himself he preferred it that way, but the silence often felt heavier than he admitted. Winter was coming early that year. The wind carried a sharp chill that slipped through jackets and settled deep in the bones. Clouds moved slowly across the sky like gray waves. The cowboy repaired broken boards around the barn and stacked firewood near the porch, preparing for colder nights. He worked steadily, without rushing, as if the rhythm of labor kept his thoughts from wandering too far into memories he did not want to face. The ranch had once been lively. Years ago, laughter and conversation had filled the yard, and horses had moved in and out under the sound of friendly voices. But time had changed things. People moved on, some left by choice, others taken by circumstances beyond control. The cowboy stayed behind, holding onto the land because it felt like the only piece of certainty left to him. Late one afternoon, as the sun dropped low and painted long shadows across the ground, he finished closing the gate near the corral. The horses shifted quietly behind him. He paused, listening to the wind brushing against the tall grass. Normally the ranch felt predictable, every sound familiar. That was why the sudden knock at the door surprised him. He turned slowly toward the house. Visitors were rare. The nearest town was far enough away that most people sent messages ahead if they planned to come. The knock came again, soft but steady. Whoever stood there was patient. He walked toward the porch, boots crunching against gravel. As he reached the steps, he noticed a figure standing near the door. A woman, wrapped in a worn coat, waited with her hands folded calmly. Her dark hair moved slightly in the wind, and her eyes watched the horizon rather than the house, as if she respected his space even before he spoke. For a moment he simply stared. Something about her presence felt different from the travelers or traders who sometimes passed through. She carried herself with quiet strength, standing straight despite obvious fatigue. "Can I help you?" he asked, keeping his voice polite but cautious. She turned toward him slowly. "I'm looking for work," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, and respectful. "I heard this ranch might need help." He studied her carefully. Many people had come asking for temporary work over the years, especially as winter approached. Some stayed only a few days before leaving. Others could not handle the isolation, but there was something unusual in her eyes. Confidence mixed with deep weariness. "What kind of work?" he asked. "Anything honest," she replied. "I know animals. I know land. I learn fast." The wind grew stronger, lifting dust across the yard. He noticed the way she stood firmly against it, as if she had faced harsher conditions before. Her clothes showed signs of travel, but they were clean and carefully kept. She did not look desperate, only determined. He hesitated. Offering work meant responsibility. It meant allowing someone into the quiet space he had carefully protected for years. Yet turning her away did not feel right either. "It's cold," he said finally. "You can come inside while we talk." She nodded once, showing gratitude without exaggeration, and stepped onto the porch. He opened the door and motioned for her to enter. Warm air from the fireplace filled the room, carrying the smell of burning wood. She paused just inside, looking around slowly, taking in the simple furniture and tools stacked neatly along the walls. He noticed how respectfully she moved, careful not to disturb anything. Many visitors walked in with curiosity or judgment, but she seemed to understand the quiet nature of the place. He poured coffee into 2 cups and handed one to her. She accepted it with both hands and whispered a quiet thank you. "What's your name?" he asked. She told him, and he nodded, repeating it softly, as if testing how it sounded. She then asked for his name, and when he answered she showed no surprise, only calm recognition. They sat across from each other at the wooden table. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, reminding them how far they were from town.
Ah! Where are you coming from?
He asked. From many places, she said after a short pause. Mostly traveling. Looking for a place where work is real. Her answer felt honest but incomplete. He sensed she carried a story she was not ready to share yet. He respected that. People often arrived at the ranch carrying pieces of their past they needed time to reveal. Work here isn't easy, he said. Long hours. Cold mornings. No crowds. Just land and animals.
That's fine, she replied quietly.
I'm used to hard work. He studied her hands. They showed signs of labor. Small scars, strong fingers, steady movements.
She was not pretending. Silence settled between them for a moment.
The fire crackled gently. He realized he had not shared a meal with someone in a long time. The presence of another person felt unfamiliar but not uncomfortable. After finishing her coffee, she stood. If you want, I can start now, she said. Before it gets dark. He almost smiled at her determination. Instead, he grabbed his coat and motioned for her to follow him outside. They walked toward the barn. Horses watched curiously as they approached. She moved toward them slowly, allowing them to sense her presence before reaching out. One horse stepped forward, lowering its head toward her hand. The cowboy noticed how naturally she handled the animal, speaking softly in a language he did not fully understand, but recognized as gentle and calming.
You've done this before, he said.
Yes, she answered simply. They worked together until the last light faded. She followed instructions carefully, but also anticipated tasks before he asked. By the time they finished, he realized the workload felt lighter than usual. As they walked back toward the house, the sky turned dark blue, and stars appeared one by one. He felt an unfamiliar sense of ease, though he could not explain why. Inside, he prepared a simple meal. She offered to help without hesitation, moving naturally around the kitchen as if she had always belonged there. They spoke little, yet the silence felt shared rather than empty. Later, as the fire burned low, he found himself studying her face more closely. Something stirred in his memory, an echo of recognition he could not place. He pushed the thought away, assuming it was just imagination. "Why this ranch?" he asked quietly. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes you feel where you are meant to go," she said, "even before you understand why."
Her words stayed with him long after the conversation ended.
That night, as the wind howled outside and the firelight flickered across the walls, he realized that the quiet routine of his life had changed with a single knock at the door. And though he did not yet know the truth behind her arrival, a strange feeling told him that nothing would remain the same after this moment. Morning arrived quietly, like it always did on the ranch. The sky turned from deep blue to soft gray as the sun slowly rose over the hills. The cowboy woke before dawn, following a routine built from years of habit. For a moment he forgot that someone else was staying in the house. But when he stepped into the kitchen, he saw a second cup already placed on the table. The native woman stood near the window, watching the early light stretch across the land. She had already lit the stove, and the soft sound of water heating filled the room. She turned when she heard his footsteps and gave a small, respectful nod. "You wake early," she said. "So do you," he replied. She smiled slightly. Old habits. They drank coffee quietly, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. Outside, the wind had settled during the night, leaving the air cold but calm. He explained the tasks for the day, checking fences along the north side, feeding the younger horses, and repairing part of the barn roof before the next storm arrived. She listened carefully, asking only a few clear questions. There was no hesitation in her voice, no sign of doubt about the hard work ahead. They stepped outside together. Frost covered the ground, and their breath showed in the air. The horses greeted them with soft sounds, and she moved among them with gentle confidence. The cowboy watched closely, noticing how quickly the animals responded to her presence. Even the stubborn mare that usually kept distance allowed her to approach without resistance. You understand them, he said. They understand when you are calm, she answered. Animals know more than we think. Her words stayed in his mind as they worked. She handled tasks carefully but efficiently, never wasting energy. When they checked the fence line, she noticed weak spots before he pointed them out. At one point, she knelt to examine tracks near the ground, explaining which belonged to deer and which were from coyotes. He raised his eyebrows, surprised by her sharp observation. You learned that growing up? He asked.
Yes, she said quietly.
The land teaches if you listen. The way she spoke about the land felt different for most people. It sounded personal, almost respectful, as if the earth itself were part of her life story. By midday, they returned to the house for a short break. He noticed that working beside someone else changed the rhythm of his day. The hours passed faster, and the heavy silence that usually followed him seemed lighter. While they ate, his eyes drifted toward a small wooden shelf in the corner of the room. It held a few personal items, old photographs, a worn leather bracelet, and a carved figure he had kept for many years. He rarely thought about those objects anymore. They were reminders of a past he had placed quietly behind him. The woman followed his gaze and looked at the shelf. Her expression changed slightly, though she quickly looked away. He noticed the moment but said nothing. After the meal, they returned to work. The sky darkened slightly as clouds moved in from the west. They climbed onto the barn roof to repair loose boards. The wind picked up again, pushing against them as they worked side by side. She moved carefully, balanced and focused, showing no fear of height or weather. You've done roof work too? He asked. She nodded. Many things. You learn what you need to survive. Her answers always held deeper meaning without revealing too much. He felt curious but did not want to push her too quickly. As afternoon faded, they finished repairs and moved back toward the house. The cowboy felt tired but satisfied. For the first time in a long while, the ranch felt less like a burden and more like a shared responsibility. Inside, she cleaned her hands and began organizing tools without being asked. He watched her quietly. She treated everything with care, as if respecting the space he had built over the years. Later, while preparing dinner, she paused near the wooden shelf again. Her eyes settled on the carved figure. Slowly she reached toward it but stopped before touching. This is old, she said softly. Yes, he replied. At it a long time? She hesitated before speaking again. It's made by someone from my people? The cowboy felt a small shock of surprise. You can tell. She nodded. The carving style is specific. The patterns mean protection. He looked at the object differently now. He had received it many years ago during a difficult time, given by someone he barely remembered clearly. Hearing her explain its meaning stirred a strange feeling in his chest. You know about these things? He asked. My family taught me, she answered. Her voice grew quieter, almost thoughtful. Some things are meant to remind us of who we are. He wanted to ask more, but sensed she was sharing only what she felt ready to reveal. Instead, he turned back to preparing the meal. That evening, they sat by the fire. Outside, the wind returned stronger, pressing against the walls and windows. The warmth inside made the ranch feel safe and separate from the world. He noticed how naturally she fit into the rhythm of the place. She listened more than she spoke, but when she did talk, her words felt meaningful. She asked about the land, the animals, and how long he had lived there. He answered honestly, though he avoided deeper details about his past. At one point she asked quietly, Do you like living alone? He paused before answering. It's simple, he said. Sometimes simple is easier. She nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. Later, as the fire burned lower, she shared small pieces of her own journey. She spoke about traveling from place to place, working where she could, learning skills from different people. She did not speak about family directly, but her stories hinted at loss and strength shaped by hardship. The cowboy listened carefully. Each detail made him feel more certain that her arrival at the ranch was not random. When it grew late, he stood to add more wood to the fire. As he moved, she suddenly spoke again. You helped someone once, she said quietly. Someone who was in trouble. He turned toward her, surprised by the statement.
What do you mean?
She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully.
I heard stories while traveling, she said slowly.
About a man who gave help when others walked away. He felt uncomfortable hearing that description. He had never considered himself a hero. He had simply done what felt right in difficult moments. Stories change over time, he said. People remember things differently. She nodded but did not argue. The conversation drifted into silence again, yet the air felt charged with unspoken thoughts. That night, as he lay awake, he found himself thinking about her words and her reaction to the carved figure. Something about her felt connected to memories he had long avoided. He tried to ignore the feeling, telling himself it was just coincidence. But deep down he knew that the mystery surrounding her presence on the ranch was slowly growing stronger. And though he could not yet understand why, he sensed that the truth she carried would soon change everything he believed about his past. The storm arrived earlier than expected. By late afternoon the sky turned dark gray, and a strong wind rolled across the valley, carrying dust and cold air that rattled every loose board around the ranch. The cowboy stood near the fence line watching clouds gather like heavy waves. He could feel the change in the air. Storms often brought trouble, and he wanted everything secure before nightfall. The native woman worked beside him without needing instruction. Together they guided the horses into the barn, checking each stall carefully. She spoke softly to the animals, calming them when thunder rumbled far away. He noticed again how naturally she understood their behavior, sensing their fear before it showed. "We should finish quickly," he said, glancing toward the horizon. "This one looks strong." She nodded, tying the last rope firmly. "Storms teach patience," she said quietly. They returned to the house just as the first drops of rain began to fall. The wind pushed hard against the walls, and the sky darkened until the ranch felt cut off from the world. Inside, the fire burned brightly, spreading warmth across the room. For a while they worked silently, preparing food and securing windows. The storm grew louder, rain striking the roof in steady rhythm. Lightning flashed through the windows, followed by distant thunder that rolled across the valley. The cowboy poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her at the table. The sound of the storm filled the space between them. Something about the moment felt different, as if the weather itself was pushing hidden truths closer to the surface. She watched the fire for a long time before speaking. "Storms make people remember things," she said softly. He leaned back slightly. "Sometimes," he answered. "Depends on what they're trying to forget." She looked at him, and for the first time since arriving, her expression showed uncertainty. It was not fear, but something heavier, like the weight of a decision she had carried for years. "I didn't come here only for work," she said at last. The words hung in the air. He felt a quiet tension rise inside him, but remained calm. "I figured there was more," he replied. "You don't travel this far without a reason." She nodded slowly. "I wanted to tell you earlier, but I needed to be sure." "Sure of what?" "That you were the same man." He felt a strange chill despite the warmth of the fire. "Same man from where?" She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. Outside, thunder shook the windows again. "Many years ago," she began, "there was a difficult time for my people. We were moving across the land, trying to find safety. Some of us were separated. I was younger then, afraid, alone." The cowboy listened carefully, feeling something stir in his memory. "One day," she continued, "I met a man who helped me. He did not ask many questions. He gave food, warmth, and protection when others turned away. He felt his heart beat slow, as old memories began to surface. Faces, moments, blurred images of the past he had tried to forget. There were many people I helped," he said quietly. "I traveled a lot back then." She nodded. "Yes, but not many gave this." She stood and walked slowly to the wooden shelf. Carefully, she picked up the carved figure he had kept for years. "You remember where you got this?" she asked gently. He stared at the carving, For a long moment he could not speak. Finally he said, "A young girl gave it to me. Said it was for protection. I didn't even know her name." Her eyes softened. "That girl was me." The words struck him like sudden thunder. He sat frozen, unable to move. Memories rushed back. An exhausted child sitting near a campfire, cold hands holding a small carving, eyes filled with both fear and determination. He remembered helping her find shelter for the night, sharing food, then leaving at dawn, believing their paths would never cross again. He looked at her now, seeing both the strong woman in front of him and the young girl from his memory. "I thought you were just passing through," he said slowly. "I was," she answered. "But you changed my path. You treated me with respect when I needed it most."
"I never forgot."
He felt overwhelmed. For years he had considered that moment small, just one of many acts during a difficult time. Hearing how deeply it had affected her made him question everything he believed about his past. "Why come now?" he asked quietly. She returned to her seat, holding the carving carefully. "Because life brought me back to this land, and because I wanted you to know what that moment meant." The storm grew louder, but inside the room everything felt still. "I searched for a long time," she continued. "I heard stories about a ranch far from town, about a man who worked alone but helped others when they needed it. I thought it might be you." He ran a hand across his face, trying to understand the weight of her words. "I didn't expect anyone to remember," he admitted. She smiled gently. "Kindness is remembered more than you think." Silence settled again, but it felt deeper now, filled with shared understanding rather than mystery. He stood and walked toward the window, watching rain fall across the yard. His thoughts moved through years of memories he had buried. He realized how much he had underestimated the impact of his actions. Behind him, she spoke softly. "I didn't come to change your life. Only to say thank you, and maybe to find a place where I could stay for a while." He turned back toward her. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "Anyone would have done the same." She shook her head gently. "No, not everyone." Her calm certainty made him quiet again. The rest of the evening passed slowly. They talked more openly now, sharing stories from their past without fear. He told her about the years after that meeting, how he eventually settled on the ranch, how loneliness had become familiar. She shared how she traveled, learned new skills, and carried the memory of that small act of help as a source of strength. At one point he laughed softly. "I guess that's why something about you felt familiar," he said. "I hoped you would recognize me," she admitted. "But I also understood if you didn't. Time changes people." Outside, the storm began to calm. Rain softened into a steady rhythm, and the thunder moved farther away. Inside, the fire burned gently, casting warm light across their faces. For the first time since she arrived, the cowboy felt a deep sense of clarity. The shock that had frozen him earlier slowly transformed into understanding. The past he thought was gone had returned, not to disturb him, but to remind him of something important, that even small moments could shape lives in ways he never imagined. As the night grew quiet, he realized that her arrival was not just a coincidence. It was the continuation of a story that had started long ago, and now, together, they stood at the beginning of its next chapter. The morning after the storm felt different from any other day on the ranch. The air was clean and fresh, and the ground still held the smell of rain. Sunlight slowly spread across the valley, touching the wet grass and turning every drop of water into small flashes of light. The cowboy stepped outside and paused for a moment, taking in the calm after the long night. He felt changed inside, though nothing around him looked different. The barn stood where it always had. The fences stretched across the land like quiet lines of memory. Yet knowing the truth about the native woman had shifted something deep within him. The past he thought was finished had returned, not as pain, but as a reminder of connection. She joined him outside a few minutes later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him without speaking, and they stood side by side, watching the horses move slowly in the early light.
"The storm passed quickly," she said. "They usually do," he replied.
But they leave things behind. She glanced at him, understanding his meaning. Neither of them rushed into conversation. The silence felt thoughtful rather than heavy. Work began soon after. The storm had knocked down a section of fencing along the western field, and some tools had been blown across the yard. Together they walked the land, repairing what needed attention. As they worked, their movements felt more natural than before. The barrier that once existed between strangers had faded, replaced by quiet trust. At one point, she stopped near a small hill overlooking the ranch. She studied the land carefully, as if reading a story written in the soil. "This place has strong spirit," she said softly. He followed her gaze. "It's just land," he replied, though not fully convinced by his own words. She shook her head gently. "Land holds memory. People leave pieces of themselves behind." He thought about that as they continued working. For years he had seen the ranch as a place to hide from memories, but perhaps it had been holding those memories safely instead. By midday they returned to the house to rest. While preparing food, she asked questions about the ranch's history, how long it had been there, who lived there before him, and what changes he had made over time. He answered openly, surprised by how easy it felt to share details he usually kept to himself. "You built most of this alone?" she asked, looking around. "Yes," he said. "It kept me busy." She nodded, thoughtfully. "Sometimes work protects us from thinking too much." He smiled, slightly. "You sound like you understand that well." "I do," she replied quietly. Later in the afternoon, they rode out to check a distant water source. The sky remained clear, and the horses moved smoothly across the open land. Riding together felt peaceful. The cowboy noticed how she guided her horse, with gentle movements rather than force. It reminded him of the way she approached everything, with patience and respect. As they reached the water source, they paused to rest. The sound of flowing water filled the quiet space between them. "You said you searched for this place," he said finally. "That must have taken time." "Yes," she answered, "but I was not always sure I would find you." "Why keep searching?" he asked. She looked toward the horizon before answering. "Because some moments deserve closure, and some people deserve to know the impact they had." Her words stayed with him long after they finished checking the water and began riding back. When they returned to the ranch, a neighbor from a nearby property arrived unexpectedly. The man greeted the cowboy warmly but looked at the woman with curiosity. Small communities often watched newcomers carefully, and the cowboy sensed the silent questions behind the visitor's eyes. "This is my friend," the cowboy said simply, introducing her without explaining further. She greeted the visitor respectfully, showing calm confidence. After a short conversation about weather and repairs, the neighbor left. But the cowboy noticed the thoughtful expression on her face afterward. "People here watch closely," she said. "They do," he replied, "but they mean well." "I understand," she said quietly. As evening approached, they worked together preparing supplies for the coming week. The cowboy realized how much easier tasks felt when shared. He found himself laughing more often, something he had not done in a long time. That night, as they sat near the fire, conversation turned toward the future. "Do you plan to stay long?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "I don't know yet. I came to find answers. Now I need to understand what comes next." He nodded slowly. "You're welcome here as long as you need." Her eyes softened at his words.
Thank you.
They spoke about goals, about rebuilding connections with others, and about learning to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight from the past. The cowboy admitted that he had spent years avoiding relationships because he feared losing them again. She listened without judgment, offering quiet understanding rather than advice.
Maybe healing doesn't mean forgetting.
Maybe it means allowing new memories to exist beside old ones. He thought about that long after she finished speaking. Over the next few days, life on the ranch settled into a steady rhythm. They worked together repairing fences, organizing supplies, and caring for the animals. The cowboy noticed how her presence changed the atmosphere. The ranch felt less like a place of isolation and more like a living space filled with purpose. One afternoon, while clearing an old storage area, they found a box of items he had not opened in years. Inside were old letters, small tools, and photographs from his earlier life. He hesitated, unsure whether to open them. She waited patiently, allowing him to decide. Finally, he sat down and began looking through the contents. Memories returned, some joyful, some painful, but instead of pushing them away, he allowed himself to feel them. She remained nearby, offering silent support. "You don't have to face everything alone," she said gently. "I'm starting to realize that," he replied. As the sun set that evening, they walked together along the fence line. The sky turned orange and pink, reflecting across the open land. The cowboy felt a sense of peace he had not experienced for years. The arrival of the native woman had not only brought answers from the past, it had also opened the possibility of a different future. The shock he once felt had transformed into gratitude, and the loneliness that once defined his life slowly faded. Standing beside her, he understood that facing the past did not weaken him. Instead, it gave him strength to move forward with honesty. And as the light faded into night, both of them sensed that the journey they had begun together was leading towards something new, something built not from fear, but from trust and understanding. The days after their long conversations passed with a quiet sense of purpose. The ranch no longer felt like a place frozen in time. Instead, it felt alive again. Morning light seemed brighter, and even simple tasks carried new energy. The cowboy noticed these small changes, but did not rush to explain them. He simply allowed himself to experience the difference. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the valley. Snow melted along the hills, and fresh green shoots appeared through the soil. The air felt lighter, and birds returned to the area, filling the silence with soft sounds that had been absent for months. The native woman continued working beside him each day. Their routine grew natural, almost effortless. They no longer needed to explain every task. A simple glance or small gesture was enough for them to understand each other. Trust had grown quietly between them, not through dramatic moments but through steady shared work. One morning while feeding the horses, the cowboy realized he was humming softly to himself. The sound surprised him. He had not done that in years. He paused, thinking about how long he had lived without noticing simple joy. She noticed his expression and smiled gently. "You look lighter today," she said. "Maybe I am," he replied, half laughing. "A strange feeling." "It is not strange," she said. "It means you are healing." He thought about her words throughout the day. Healing had never been a goal he consciously pursued. He had simply focused on surviving and maintaining the ranch. Now he began to understand that healing could happen slowly, without effort, through connection and honesty. As the weeks passed, they worked on new projects together. They repaired an old shed that had been unused for years. She suggested turning it into a space for tools and crafts, and he agreed. Working side by side, they cleaned, repaired, and rebuilt the structure. Each small success strengthened their partnership. One afternoon, while resting near the barn, she spoke about her future. "I have spent many years moving from place to place," she said thoughtfully. "I never stayed long because I felt unfinished inside. Now I feel different." "How different?" he asked. She looked around at the land, like I finally stopped running. Her words made him pause. He understood that feeling deeply. For years he had believed he was choosing isolation, but perhaps he had also been running. From memories, from loss, from the possibility of connection. "You don't have to leave if you don't want to," he said quietly. She studied his face carefully, sensing the sincerity behind his words. "And you are sure you want someone here?" she asked gently. He nodded slowly. "Yes. I think I am ready for that now." That evening they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky turned golden and long shadows stretched across the land. The moment felt peaceful, almost timeless. They talked about small plans for the future. Expanding the garden, improving the fence near the river, maybe even inviting neighbors for a gathering one day. These ideas would have felt impossible to him before, but now they seemed natural. One day, a group of travelers passed through the valley. The cowboy welcomed them briefly, offering water and directions. He noticed how confidently she greeted them, sharing stories and laughter. Watching her interact with others made him realize how much he had missed simple human connection. After the travelers left, he said, "You bring life into this place." She smiled softly. Life was already here. It just needed to be seen again. Spring arrived fully, transforming the ranch. Flowers appeared near the fence lines, and the horses grew more energetic. They spent longer hours outdoors, repairing and planning for the seasons ahead. One afternoon, while walking along the edge of the property, the cowboy stopped near a hill where they could see the entire valley. He felt grateful in a way he had not felt for years. "When you knocked on my door," he said, "I didn't know what to expect. I thought it was just another traveler passing through." "And now?" she asked. "Now I think it was something meant to happen," he said honestly. She nodded, understanding his meaning without needing more words. The memory of their past connection no longer felt heavy. Instead, it felt like a bridge that brought them to the present moment. They no longer spoke of shock or confusion. Those feelings had been replaced by calm acceptance. One evening, while organizing supplies inside the house, he picked up the carved figure she had given him long ago. He turned it carefully in his hands, noticing details he had never truly seen before. "This has protected me for years," he said. She smiled gently. "Maybe it reminded you that you were never truly alone." He placed the carving back on the shelf, but this time it felt different. It was no longer just an object from the past. It represented a connection that had grown into something meaningful in the present. As time passed, the ranch became a place of shared stories. They cooked meals together, laughed at small mistakes, and supported each other during difficult tasks. The cowboy found himself looking forward to each day rather than simply enduring it. One morning, as they prepared to ride out toward the far field, he realized that the loneliness he had once carried had quietly faded. It had not disappeared suddenly. Instead, it had been replaced by companionship and mutual respect. Riding side by side, they talked about how life often brings unexpected moments that change everything. Neither of them believed in perfect endings, but both understood the value of growth and new beginnings. When they returned to the ranch that evening, the sky filled with soft colors as the sun set behind the hills. They stood together near the porch, watching the light fade. "I used to think my life was finished in many ways," he admitted, "but now I see that it was only waiting for something new." She nodded. "Sometimes the path circles back before it moves forward." He smiled at her words.
The story that began with a quiet knock at the door had become a journey of understanding and renewal.
The shock that once froze him had opened his heart again, showing him that even simple acts of kindness can return years later in unexpected ways. As night settled over the ranch, the cowboy felt at peace. The land no longer felt empty, and the future no longer felt uncertain. Together they had built something real, not through dramatic change, but through steady trust, shared work, and quiet hope. And as the stars appeared above the valley, both of them understood that this was not an ending, but a new beginning, shaped by respect, resilience, and the simple choice to move forward together.